It's 12:15. We're going to start. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And welcome to a Friday seminar arranged by the Center of Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Oslo. So my name is Teresa Pepe, and today I have the big honor of introducing an outstanding and very special scholar, and whose work is very, very interesting, I guess, for many of us here at the center. So our speaker for today is Vera Mironova. I will introduce her briefly. Vera is a Russian-American academic scholar currently based at Harvard University. Her work focuses on the complexities of radical armed groups and civilians affected by their actions. Dr. Mironova has mainly been working in conflict zones such as Syria, Iraq, Ukraine, Yemen, and Myanmar. So when I said special, I think one of the specialty, of course, of your work, Vera, is the fact that you are often referred as a frontline scholar, and this time not in a metaphorical way, right? So Vera's work, Vera's research has been embedded also with their experience in conflict zones. For example, in Iraq, with Iraq Special Operation Forces, as they recaptured the city of Mosul from ISIS in 2016, 2017. So Vera has worked, has had encounters with foreign fighters and access to primary sources, which has then resulted also in your book published in 2019, entitled From Freedom Fighters to Jihadists, Human Resources of Non-State Armed Groups, published by Oxford University Press in 2019. And before that, she has also worked in conflict zones in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. So I liked, Vera, what was written on your website, on your personal website, that you are usually marked out for your willingness to risk take, and you are no stranger to dangerous assignment. And the proof of that is also that you have accepted to give us this talk while it's 5 o'clock in the morning for you and 12 for us. So we really thank you for that. And I will leave you now the floor for your lectures. So the plan is that your lecture is going to take roughly 45 minutes, and then we will leave roughly 30 minutes for question and answers from the audience. So without further introduction, thank you, Dr. Mironova, for accepting your invitation, and we look forward to listening to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me and for those nice words. Yeah, my cats were a little surprised at 5 a.m., like why everyone is waking up, like something is going on, like, but they could get used to that. So let me start sharing my screen, at least try to do so. Can you see it? Just, I'm checking.
Yes.
Yes? Okay,
yes.
Awesome.
Looks
Absolutely awesome. So I'm going to be, this presentation would be not very academic, so I'm not going to be bothering you with regressions. But it would be more about like describing what's going on in the field and what are the problems, for example, for graduate students, what they could be also looking at, right? I mean, if we want in Q&A, we could go into particular, like paper academic problems of that research. But now I want to focus more overall, right, about what's going on. So in this research, in this project, I'm trying to understand how basically courts and trials could help post-conflict society not get back to where they were. So usual transitional justice. But here, the problem is that transitional justice as we know it and as we studied that, it is focusing on civil conflicts, right? But now majority of wars are getting the status of a terrorist war, terrorist groups, terrorist war, terrorists. And, you know, in a normal life, like watching TV, we don't quite care how they call them, right? But when we're talking in the policy circles, when we're calling someone terrorist, officially, it triggers a whole different set of laws that we need to be working with, dealing with those groups of people. And here, previous theories of transitional justice, they still apply, but with, I mean, a little differently. So that's what I'm going to be talking about, because right now, majority of conflicts are related to terrorism. So we need to see how it's different, what we have now, talking about transitional justice. And I'm doing it an example of Iraq, because it's now the biggest conflict with the terrorism armed group that are currently on trial. Iraqi counterterrorism law. Iraq did have counterterrorism law, surprisingly, since 1970s, when Saddam was, you know, nicely using it to deal with opposition in the South, Shia opposition. And laws of this his counterterrorism laws are specific because of that, very specific. So, I mean, they're quite simple. If you are a male member of a terrorist group, you're getting death sentence. If you are a female member and or a supporter, like a civilian help somehow, like fed terrorists or whatever, you're getting life in prison. Children older than 14 are tried as adults, and 2 anonymous witness statements are enough for conviction. Like, how do you guys like that, like in Norway? So, and this was, let's say, okay for Saddam, right? He had a very small opposition of 2.5 people somewhere down south, and it kind of worked. At least, you know, majority closed their eyes on that stuff. Well, then US invasion came in, and they labeled a lot of armed groups that were against them terrorist armed groups, basically everyone. And that triggered this old law in terms of prosecuting them. And that already did work quite well, because now we had, you know, kind of standing armies, or at least insurgencies, not 2 people protesting against Saddam, right? And more people started falling under this law that was, again, revitalized by US invasion. So then it was just the beginning. So we could live with that back then. But now we have ISIS. And ISIS, like, has nothing to do with the previous terrorist groups for whom this law was written. So, for example, ISIS controlled 40% of the territory of Iraq. It was basically a civil war. That's how a lot of Iraqis see it, right? Between Sunnis and Shia. Then ISIS was actually government. So they were governing a territory for like 2 years. So you could imagine how many people fall under help of terrorism. Like everyone who's on ISIS controlled territory, they could fall under this definition, because somehow they did help the armed group. I mean, because they were government. Also, in terms of functionality of this armed group, they had an unprecedented number of foreign fighters, nowhere in the law. They had an unprecedented number of female members, nowhere in the law. They had an unprecedented number of underage fighters, nowhere in the law. And the tactics they used was not stuff that, you know, the previous terrorist organizations in Iraq used before that, right? So genocide, slavery, a whole different set of problems. So as you could probably understand, this previous law just like really does not work. So to try to understand what to do with that and how not to allow this old law to mess everything up, to be honest. So we did this huge 5-year project on studying what do actually people think about prosecutions. So it's a joint project between even Iraqi Judicial Council. They agreed for that. Okay, they contributed at least something. They agreed on it. Then coalition governments who are also interested in Iraq not getting back from where we are. So in these huge projects, we're trying to understand just basically what to do with those people, just as easy as that, what to do with all those people, because you could see here in the picture in news that in 2018, it was reported that 19,000 folks are in prisons because of ties to ISIS in Iraq. Well, I think it's an understatement. I would say like 25,000 easy. I mean, it's a lot. So the question is what to do with them. For example, who should be prosecuted? First question, who should be prosecuted for what happened? Is it just male fighters, female group members? What to do with child soldiers, you know, because they're guilty, but they're children? What to do with group supporters who not clear their affiliation to start with? Then, okay, if we claim that some of those groups are in fact guilty, what to do with them? Right now in my toolbox, you know, if I'm a judge, I have only two basically options. I have death sentence and life in prison. Like the judge right now doesn't have any other tools, even if he doesn't want to apply them. There is no law that allows him to do it, right? So maybe some groups could just go to prison for a short time. Okay, maybe a long time, but maybe someone could get amnesty. And also, who should be judging? Should it be international courts or local courts? And if it's a local court, what do we mean? Baghdad, where a majority of judges are Shia, or Mosul court, where there are some Sunni judges. I mean, they're not majority by any stretch of imagination, but they exist. And also, very big question, what to do with extrajudicial killings of ISIS members? So, for example, after the liberation of Mosul, I spent some time embedded with police right after the liberation. And every day they would be getting multiple calls at night about finding a dead body that was apparently an ISIS militant who was killed by his neighbors who were just revenging him. And they wouldn't do anything just because, well, I mean, they don't even care because he would get death sentence anyway, and it's just making it faster, right? So, and of course, like it would never occur to anyone to punish those guys. Like, I mean, if you mention it like you're a terrorist yourself, like how would you punish a guy who killed an ISIS member? Like he's a hero. So, but again, you know, it could be called hero in a local context by locals, but I mean, it's called extrajudicial killings, basically what he did. So we are trying to understand how different, how people of Iraq, let's put it broadly, understand what should happen. What is their opinion on that? I'm not saying that the law should be constructed based on what people think, right? But we need to be able to take it into account. So this research should exist. It's a 5-year project, so there is like a lot of field work involved. For 2 years, I was on the ground conducting field work for this research. So I attended numerous ISIS trials all over Iraq, interviewed, I think, all ISIS Iraqi counterterrorism judges, some lawyers, interviewed multiple sentenced ISIS members, locals, foreigners, female, males. And then we conducted surveys of different subgroups of population of Iraq. So different by like what we could see, they have different opinions, right, on the prosecutions. So we surveyed ISIS victims in Mosul. We surveyed ISIS affiliates in camps around Mosul. So it's not a refugee camp, it's like a detention camp. So I think there are no more there, but that's where ISIS family members were moved after the liberation of Mosul. So everyone in this camp has some, I mean, not everyone, but majority has some kind of relationship with ISIS, either direct membership or family membership. And we surveyed several waves, surveys of civilians in Mosul and Baghdad. So basically here we're covering Sunni and Shia, and Sunni who are affected directly, Mosul, and Baghdad guys who are, I mean, who had little to do usually with ISIS up north. But again, I mean, they're citizens of Iraq, so their opinion is extremely important, you know, because it's the future of their country, not mine. And finally, to understand how all that stuff works inside all those trials and courts, I worked for 7 months. I worked at UNITAD. It's a UN investigation team that is in charge of investigating ISIS crimes and helping local courts with prosecution. Is it recorded, right? Okay. Okay, so we first I want to start talking in general before we're gonna get into particular problematic areas such as women and kids, right? Let's talk about general punishment that people want for ISIS members, right? Forget about the law right now. What do people want? So here it's a little messy. I mean, because it's a lot of different different subgroups of ISIS members, but you know, I would walk you through it easily. So we surveyed here ISIS camps, those guys, and Mosul civilians, those guys. And we asked them, for example, like different groups of ISIS membership, right? Leaders, foreign fighters, fighters, police, civilian working for the group. How should they be punished? Just, you know, just all the categories of membership in ISIS we could possibly think of. And you could see in general in this picture that opinions are very different, right? So basically ISIS, on the left hand side here from 1 to 5, this is a level of punishment. 1 being amnesty and 5 being death sentence. So amnesty, a short term in prison, a long term in prison, life in prison, and death sentence. So you could see here that in general, ISIS folks, I mean, they think that ISIS should be punished much less than people who were civilians or victims of ISIS. Well, no brainer, right? I mean, of course, those guys want them to be punished more. But what is interesting, and just looking at this picture in general, you see that there is a huge difference, right? Like huge difference on all categories. Basically, those bars are jumping like, I don't know what. But there are 2 issues. Let's look at the bright side. There are 2 points where both of those groups agree, or it's really a bright side, right? So first, they agree on punishment for leaders. This first blue bar, right? They agree that leaders should be punished. I mean, it's a very good start. You know, at least we agree on something moving forward with transitional justice, right? Okay, although in a qualitative interviews, we figured out that it's for different reasons. For example, civilians, they think that leaders, you know, started all this mess, so they should be punished. And ISIS members think that ISIS leadership did not deliver what they promised. So they basically said, you come to us, we're going to give you everything. And guess what? They didn't give them anything. So they're very pissed. But even that doesn't matter right now. At least we've found one common ground we could agree on in terms of prosecution, right? And another good news in this smallest bar at the end, it's a punishment for civilians who just pay taxes to ISIS. So they did not participate even in a group functions, but they pay taxes. And here, both groups agree that those people should not be punished at all. And, you know, I mean, you would also think like, come on, everyone had to pay taxes. Of course, they shouldn't be punished. But I want to mention that according to law, it's not called paying taxes to the armed group. It's called financial support for a terrorism group. And in, let's say, US, it would be 15 years. But here, at least good news are that both groups agree that those people should not be punished at all. Okay, then it gets trickier in the middle, right? So let's talk about fighters. Even ISIS members, they agree that fighters should also be punished. Not as radical as beheadings, you know, not as radical as death sentence, but they should be punished. They're fine with that. So such guys as local fighters, foreign fighters, and members of religious police, both groups agree that, okay, they really deserve punishment. Where we have the biggest disagreement here is on civilian group supporters. And even right now in courts, it's the biggest question. Because technically by law, they are members of the armed group who helped the terrorist group basically by other means other than holding a weapon, right? So they are supposed to be sentenced the same way as any other ISIS member. But ISIS was a government. So basically, the question is, what am I going to do with the guy who worked in a tax collection office, or the guy who worked in like electricity something, right? He didn't help the terrorist group, but without him, terrorist group would not exist, right? Because they need electricity. So this is a very huge question, and you could see those bars here, very big difference in opinions. And right now, like, courts are also dealing with that. That's where the main disagreement is, because to be honest, the court took the side of ISIS civilians, obviously, and by law. So right now they're prosecuting them. So which means not only it's like weird, right? But also it means that a lot of people in Mosul, they're afraid to go back, like to be known to security forces, because they work as electricians in ISIS, right? Because they are arrested. So it makes them like unsecure, and that's not good for security of the country, because they basically could not go back to normal life, because they're constantly worried about, like, would someone knock on their door tomorrow, say that you helped ISIS and you need to get life in prison. So it's this part is a really big question. And Iraqi law absolutely doesn't help, because they don't Iraq, like any law with a terrorist group, they prosecute on membership, and not on what did you do in a group. So literally the question is, did you do bayat, did you do allegiance to ISIS, or you didn't? So in that case, like, they don't look at, that's one of the differences with the current terrorism law compared to the civil war stuff, that here we prosecute only on membership. And the same thing in, at least I know, in US and Russia and many foreign countries, the same thing, membership. So next slide, we're getting into even more bizarre stuff. It's gender. That is like all over the place. Again, it's a very complicated picture. It's a little messy, and I understand that, but I want to leave it there while I'm just discussing it, right? So here is this picture is a result of 4 survey experiments. So those questions were asked not as normal questions, but as survey experiments. So for example, half of the respondents got a question. Ahmed was a member of ISIS, and he joined because he believed in a group. And the second half got a question that Ahmed was a member of ISIS because he joined because he ran out of food and he needed a job, right? So all of those are survey experiments, but they're in one picture. Okay, and so now let's see what people think here. So interesting things. Let's look at Mosul civilians. So first, they do not care why people joined in ISIS. They really don't. So they are saying, okay, you joined because you believed in religion, or in whatever religion they were selling to you, or you joined because you ran out of money for food for your kids. Well, I don't care. Punishment is the same. So they are not, you know, if you are looking at the general law in criminal law, right? In criminal law, we're looking at why a person did particular thing, right? And it does matter. Here, no one cares. You were a part of the group, that's it, done. So the same thing, basically, more or less the same thing for a worker. And this is like even worse. So basically, we have the same thing for, we have the same punishment, desired punishment for a male who became an, let's say, accountant, or just accountant in ISIS because he believed in the organization, but you know, he's really shitty fighter, so they didn't put him to fight because he's absolutely useless, and they put him to accounting, but he really wanted to join the group and help them in all of their, you know, great things. And a guy who basically, again, ran out of food, he went to ISIS, they told him to, you know, take a weapon, he was like, no, can I be something like not harmful to people, can I be an accountant, right? So, but punishment, again, people desire the same punishment here for both of those non-combatants. Then next 2 bars, dirty green and red. so it's like, it's very weird already, and now it's getting more weird. Wives. So the prosecution of female wives of ISIS members who were not fighters. I mean, they just wife. And here we're talking only about locals, by the way. We're not talking about foreigners who definitely, believed in that stuff came in. But we're talking about locals, local wife, and see comparison and punishment for local wife and a female worker. So basically, more or less, the punishment they demand is more or less the same, something between a short prison sentence, a long prison sentence, and a life in prison for both female worker and for female wife of a member. So they demand such long sentences for them. And here talking about female worker, okay, yeah, we could be talking about women were employed counter to the popular belief that women were sitting at home. Women were actively employed in ISIS in such things as religious police, a lot of amniyat work. So it's like spying, internal security control. Basically, even inside ISIS, everyone was afraid of women because they were spies for a local ISIS FBI, basically. And the weirdest stuff ever, the last two bars. Low punishment for low-level wife and for high-level wife. So again, a survey experiment. We're asking, so Fatima was a wife of a commander, and what should be her punishment? And Fatima was a wife of a low-level guy ever. What should be her punishment? And you could see here that, first of all, both should be punished. And second, like high-level wife should be punished more. So not only like by law, it's just weird and, but it doesn't fit law at all, but also, like it sounds quite interesting because, okay, let's assume that the smart guy got up in ranks in ISIS, right? Just, because he's smarter, so he raised in ranks. So basically you have been punished for marrying a, smarter guy. So, but that's what they demand. And like, you would think it's an exercise. Absolutely not. Like, I was in many meetings with judges who were deciding what to do with those wives. And they had no idea, because in law, nowhere. They were literally like thinking, sitting there and like discussing like what should we invent now? Because they had no law. And particularly they were discussing, when I was there, they were discussing I think she was a cousin of Baghdadi. So she was a cousin of Baghdadi married to another high-level guy. They have these dynasties there. And she lived all her life in a household of Baghdadi during ISIS. So then I think she was caught in Syria. She was somehow sent back to Iraq, and they were sentencing her. And they literally had a debate because half of the judicial council were like, we don't have a law, like we need to let her go, because we're lawyers and there's no law. And half were like, you are kidding me? Like, I could not let her out of my court right now. Could you imagine like how people are gonna look at me? Like, I'm a judge. I could not take, it's a political decision to let her out because everyone knows that she was that inside the family. So I think they ended up giving her 15 years, which is okay, let's say better than life in prison or life sentence. But what is the funny part is that 15 is not even on the books of Iraqi law. So they literally invented this number, just invented it. So they themselves have no idea what to do with those problems. And why is it the case? Why are we so worried about women married to high-level ISIS guys? Well, because we're afraid of them. It's simple as that. It's not a discrimination. It's not actually other way around. So if there is, you could see on this picture, ISIS respondent, for example, ISIS members, they're saying, when you ask them a bunch of questions about female participation, they're like, come on, women are not radical. Women has nothing to do with that. They had no part in the organizations. Like no one invited them anywhere. They were doing nothing. They're no important. And they were just following their husbands, and they could not do anything because men were in charge. While civilians, Mosul civilians, and victims of ISIS, they're saying, wow, no, that's not what we saw, and that's not how we feel right now. We think that those women who were with those husbands in this beautiful organization, they're as radical as men. Most important, they are as dangerous as men. And they were important to the group. They were important to fighting. We divided them in this question because we wanted to understand what are they afraid of, because to solve not the problem, we want to try to help not only to solve the prosecution problem, like how many years to give them, right? But what should we look at to prevent, to stop people thinking that way, right? To kind of reduce the desired sentence across the board. And but civilians, they think that women were important to fighting. And I like how they don't discriminate. That's very loud. They're basically saying that no, like I don't believe that women were following their husbands. So like the mean of basically believing is very low. And the same thing for men were in charge. And who is right and who is not? I mean, it depends, because they are both cases, right? They're really, really sad cases when, for example, a man decided to join ISIS and his wife was saying no over my dead body. Absolutely not. So she was the one constantly fighting with him so he doesn't join, or he leaves, right? And now she's prosecuted as ISIS wife, although she was all the time fighting really hard for him to stop doing it. Or I have cases, for example, among foreign fighters, where women were the ones dragging their husbands into ISIS. And then the husband managed to run away because he didn't want to go. But the wife, like he was following the wife to protect her, whatever. And then even at some point he was like done, like you could sit here, die, whatever, I'm out of here. And he did escape and come home to surrender, and she remained in Mosul and died there. So, it goes both ways. Like reality, we're not talking about reality here. We quite even don't know that. I'm only talking about perceptions. But the important thing here to take from this slide is that basically civilians are demanding that high punishment for ISIS women, and in particular wives of leadership, because they consider them dangerous for future. They want them to get, to disappear somewhere, in prison, death sentence, whatever. They're afraid of them. Okay, next question. Next question is children. So now we're getting like worse and worse. So women were really bad. Now children really bad. So we are comparing here punishment for adult fighter and child fighter versus adult worker and child worker. We hear a lot about child fighters, because they were all over ISIS propaganda. But majority of kids were not actually fighters. They were just somehow working there. Maybe both kind of military positions. So for example, a lot of children spies, right? Because you don't notice them running around. A lot of that, but also something like, cleaning a car. I have a kid in prison right now in outside of Mosul, who is there because his neighbors, I think he's like 12, because his neighbors saw him cleaning the car of his father, ISIS car, who was a big guy in Amnia, in intelligence, ISIS intelligence. So he was cleaning his car, which the neighbor decided that it qualifies for, child worker of ISIS. And this kid is seriously, like, he's in prison now. Like, and no one, I don't know what's going to happen to him. But cleaning the car of your father, in US, it's kind of, that's what you do when you're a child, just because, like, that's what you do. And but here, apparently, it qualified him to be in prison. So although his father is a long time dead, and he was never even part of that, but it's enough for witness statement. So yeah, so we are comparing those two things. So good news here is that those replies are only Mosul civilians and victims, because of ISIS members. They're saying, like, come on, kids, forget about it. Like, it's all 0-0. They are against any prosecution of kids. But here, so Mosul civilians and victims, they're saying good news is that they are against prosecution of child workers. So basically here civilians agree with me on the idea of this kid who washed the car should be out of prison into school as soon as possible. And this is like bullshit what you guys are doing there in courts. But with child fighters, the situation is different. So they do want them to be prosecuted, and they want them to be prosecuted quite long sentences. It's between long sentence, we're talking about 15, and life sentence. So this is a trick here. So basically they want them to be prosecuted as similar to adult workers. Okay, so the next question, what is child, right? We're talking about Iraq. We're sitting in, developing countries that is following UN conventions on whatever. But what is the child here? Because it's another tricky question. Basically, UN and all international guys, they specify child as 18. Iraq, I think, has it 14. And ISIS had it like 10. So the question is, especially the gray zone is between 14 and 18, 16 and 18, it's absolute gray zone. Because here local laws, especially in Muslim countries, they're not equal to international conventions and so on. So that's what we are looking here at. So again, in the previous question, we were just asking about child and adult in language, right? But after that, we asked them, okay, so what do you mean by child? And you could see here on the left-hand side that the age of punishment that they were talking about in a previous slide, in the previous survey questions, they actually mean 16, 17, and 18. So it's still, and they do understand that it's lower than a age by law, which they are wrong because they are looking about UN law. The Iraqi law is different, but I mean, you could see here that even stuff that they said, they are referring to 16-year-old, which is lower than international standard. But at least they're not, okay, let's look at the bright side again, always looking for a bright side. They're not going with the ISIS idea of adult being 10. Okay, let's at least something good, right? Next question, again, survey experiment about children. So we asked them, being very influenced by this case of the kid who was cleaning the car. So we give them a survey questions. In one case, the kid joined because his father was a fighter, right? And in another survey question experiment, we asked them. We mentioned that the kid joined just because he joined, like he himself joined, right, without a father. So he was not dragged by his father, whom he could not say no because he's 10 years old, right? Like we explicitly specify here he's Sunni and he's 10 years old. So let's see how it changed individual mind of a respondent in those two options. So good news. People think that if the child was brought in by his father, so basically drafted in, right? He needs to get lower sentence. At 10 years old, I want to emphasize, we're talking about 10. Not, it's especially, we made it especially lower than the answers in a previous question. We're talking about 10. So they want to put him in a long and short-term prison sentence. And really bad news, death sentence. So basically, control question is the one without a father. So the kid just joined, being 10. And basically, 30% of respondents wants to give him death sentence. So because of that, we have, so you understand the perception right now that is going on in the field, right? So because of that, we could not bring refugees, these ISIS guys from camps back to Mosul because they're afraid of extrajudicial killings, because that's the opinion. And I have a separate paper, a separate slide on extrajudicial killing, but I could tell you up front, everyone agrees with that. It's like, yeah, sure. I mean, they're heroes if they kill on the street. They saved, you know, government money on prosecuting them. Isn't it great? So that's why all those ISIS families, they couldn't return home. Everyone considers, all those ISIS families considers courts absolute BS, you know, because they're basically an extension of the military, right? And so they don't trust these courts at all, none, nada. And my favorite part that I didn't put it in the slide, it's a slightly different topic, but we could talk about it in Q&A, is that Iraqi law doesn't distinguish the guy who surrendered versus the guy who's captured. Both of them get death sentence. So you do understand that there is absolutely zero intention to surrender, like none, zero. So of course, so he couldn't surrender. If he goes back and he's noticed, he's going to be killed by the neighbors, who would become heroes doing that. So of course, there is like absolute zero intention, absolute zero idea of ever surrendering and stopping this war. So even if you're a 10-year-old kid who was cleaning his father's car, your best bet is to go into insurgency. Because, you know, you don't want to go in prison and, you know, beg for not getting a death sentence because you're, you know, quite probably not okay father got you into ISIS at 10. So that's basically a very easy explanation of how we're fueling insurgency with our counterterrorism law currently in Iraq in place. Very optimistic, right? Like I mean, this optimistic style at 6 a.m. I'm proud of myself. Okay, I guess that's it. So questions, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This was shocking and interesting at the same time. So I would like to invite everyone to raise your hand for questions. Yes. So Lars Gule, please.
Thank you. I have two questions, and one is related to the total number of foreign women traveling to the caliphate. According to recent figures presented by Professor Brynjalia in his expert testimony a week ago in a Norwegian ongoing trial, he talked about between 6,500 and to 7,000 women who joined the caliphate. You have just said that women were feared, they were active. And I'm wondering, do we know anything about how many were active? Because the activity of women seems to go contrary to the ideology of the Islamic State, emphasizing the role as housewives and the bringer up of children. So of course we know about the female Hisba. We know, as you mentioned, those who were infiltrators and were spies. But do we know anything about total numbers? Because 6,000 to 7,000 is a lot of women, and they would not all be in propaganda, in the Amniya, in the Hisba. So do we know anything about the numbers of the local Syrians and Iraqis participating in activities? And is that different from the foreign women? That was the first question.
I think it's a very good question that is extremely important, but I'm not sure anyone could answer it like to an actual number. What we can calculate, there is a big difference between locals and foreigners. So foreigners were much more active, females just across the board, like 5 times more active, because I mean they self-selected into coming, so they active assist. What numbers we could possibly calculate is the problem here that we don't have documents, because even the women who were working for Amniya, they were usually wives of Amniya. So they were not on a special payroll. So there is no paper trail on them. What we do know, for example, is that in addition to those Amniya, Hizbah, and other police security jobs and medical, right, that have their own paper trail. We have two groups of, I don't know why media was not writing about it, but we have two battalions. I mean, I don't know, no battalion, two groups, two katibas, right? Two katibas of female fighters. One is called Aisha, the second one is called Nusayba. And I mean, it's a military camp. It's a military camp where female were training to participate in actual fighting. So numbers for them do exist, because I know, for example, Kazakhstan repatriated almost everyone from camps, and they prosecuted women who were in those groups, and they were trained also by women. So, for example, this famous case with Lisa Smith in Ireland, who was 10 years in Irish Defense Force before going to ISIS. As far as I know, she was a trainer there. And I know another girl from Uzbekistan who was Olympic reserve in martial arts. She was also a trainer there. So they had a full-scale battalions, fighting units of women.
The second question is that you are quoted in the daily newspaper Aftenposten not long ago, where you said you could not stay in the caliphate for 6 years without doing anything. What did you mean by that?
It's like you could not be living there under the government without helping the government one way or another. It's just like, I lived 4 years under Trump, right? Like I still pay taxes. I still, consult the government on issues, right? So technically, for example, I was contributing to human power, right? Mm-hmm. So the same thing here is just any government, do you like it or not? If you live there, you would be supporting. So for example, your husband, did something and like he's wounded. Guess what? You're going to be going and volunteering in a hospital caring for wounded.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have now Brynjar. Leah has raised his hand, please. Hi, Brynjar, just unmute yourself. Yes.
Hello. Yes. Okay. I was wondering, what do we know about the number of convictions during the trials so far? How many have been convicted, and how many of the convictions have resulted in capital punishments, and how many of those have been carried out? Is it like most of them are on death row, or are capital punishments being carried out summarily?
Very good question. I'm also kind of trying to figure it out, but Iraq government is not making it public. So, for example, I know that 96, I would say, % of trials, they go conviction. Even like super ridiculous one. Like even I was presented in a trial that like the guy, he was a member of PKK, and they convicted him as ISIS, and they sentenced him to a death sentence without even checking he's like that PKK was paying his salary. With foreign journalists in there. So it's like, like you could do whatever basically. And so 96, 99% are convictions. In terms of death sentence, so I know for a long time there was, they stopped doing it, I think because of international attention to this issue. And then there were news that they restarted it, but let's keep very secret. Like they're not making it public. And also we need to be very careful here that we have we basically have two jurisdictions inside Iraq. I was talking only about Baghdad, but there is also Kurdistan. So although Kurdistan, for example, also has a death sentence because they are officially Iraq, Kurdistan for the last, I think, 10, 20 years, they don't have, they sentence to death, but they don't execute. So, because they could not sentence because they have to have law of Iraq, but they don't do it. So this is also another trick of how many people are actually there who are not going to be executed, although they are on execution list. But yeah, no, I'm trying to get those numbers, and I'm trying to get access to where they do executions, but I didn't succeed yet.
Thank you. I have now Thomas Hägghammer. Varsågod.
Yes, hi.
Hey.
Good to see you, Vera, and thanks for a great talk. As usual, you're bringing incredibly valuable data to the conversation, so thank you for that. I have two questions. The first is, how do these data on attitudes to former perpetrators compare? And I'm thinking comparison, I guess, in two directions here. One, how do they compare to attitudes towards jihadists in other countries? And also historically, how do they compare to, like, you know, I don't know, post-Nazi Germany or some other perhaps more recent situation? The other question is, do we know anything about the time trends? Like, does the anger fade? Does the fury sort of show signs of fading? Yeah, those are my questions. Thank you.
I would answer the second one. I don't know exactly time trend. So we did several waves of surveys, for example, in Mosul, and there was no significant change. But the question is here, they were still, very close to each other. So, you know, we're talking about such big issues in terms of time frame, and we did it with a gap of 1 year. Nothing changed in 1 year at all. Like, you know, those guys were still in the camps, you know, prosecutions were still ongoing. So I didn't see anything, but it's a very short time frame. It would be interesting to see, especially not only like as much with time as with events. So for example, you know, the stuff is getting more active, so I'm sure people would be more afraid of those guys and they would hate them more. But yeah, I think there would be events that would trigger the change in attitude. I absolutely agree with you. And the first question about the attitude change compared to jihadists in other countries, you mean the foreign fighters who were returned? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it could be different things. So I don't know, for example, do we know, yeah, what do people in Tunisia or Morocco think about their citizens who went to join ISIS, or you know, what do Europeans think about what punishments people should get? Like, so what I want to know is sort of, you know, where are the Iraqis on the no mercy scale, kind of geographically and historically?
This one is a very important question in terms of policy, because I don't know Europe, I don't work with Europe, but I work with Central Asia, which is basically the second biggest number of foreign fighters after like Tunisia. And while the difference is such, I mean, it's colossal. So for example, attitude in Central Asia towards ISIS members is, oh, those poor women, our government needs to do everything possible to make their life great when we return them home. So they blame the government for not taking them back. So they don't quite understand, because they haven't seen it on the ground in their own country, you know, they don't understand who are those people. So they treat them, there are like really big problems in, for example, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, where they really treat them as heroes. It's hilarious. I mean, it's ridiculous. But they give them free housing, free medicine. I mean, free housing. Could you imagine? Like, they brought them from ISIS, and they give them free housing because they don't have anywhere to live, right? I'm so sad. And then they don't prosecute women, saying that, oh no, women should be with their kids. That's why we could not prosecute women, right? But that the women is the main source of radicalization of the kid, and they need to be separated just because. Like, it doesn't occur to anyone. So in that sense, and the so-called, I mean, Mother's Western Mafia, who is trying to shape the narrative, saying that ISIS women are all victims, you know, those groups, right? I mean, they're really succeeding, actually. So they, in those countries where those women were returned, everyone is like, oh, you poor thing, you had to survive so much in Baghouz. Oh, sad. Or in Mosul. So yeah, here opinions are absolutely polarized.
Okay, we have time still for some more questions. Lars, I see your hand raised up again. Would you like to ask another question?
Yes, comparing Iraq and Syria, do you have any impressions? We hear about the families, men and women being released from the detention camps back into their families. I mean, the tribal system in eastern Syria is part of it, where they give the responsibility for rehabilitation and control to the extended families. But that seems to be a quite different approach from the vindictiveness in the Iraqi population, especially than in Mosul. Have you any ideas or comments on such a comparison?
Very good question. We are working on that. So we actually got a permit to do surveys in Syria of civilians, then ISIS in camps, and even ISIS in prisons in Hasaka, foreign ISIS. But with COVID, we could not do it. So we are waiting right now for the end of pandemic, inshallah. And that's exactly what we plan to do in next step. Because I couldn't answer your question. I honestly don't know, but that's because you're right. It's different, but I don't know how. So that's what we're trying to find out.
Brynjar, varsågod.
Yes, thank you. It's really great to have you here to give the talk on this topic, very important topic. What do we know about the transfer of ISIS affiliates, meaning women or children, from the camps or from Syria to Iraq? There were some reports about people being transferred, but I mean, and also cases of foreign affiliates being transferred to Iraq. Is that something you've seen a lot, or is that only the exceptions? And my second question is you've probably seen the report by Asad al-Muhammad and Anne Speckard on the role of women in ISIS, and they have sort of a very detailed report about ISIS being involved in a number of different parts in the military system in ISIS. And that's the only report I've seen that gives such or suggests such a wide military or security or intelligence role for women, while most other reports only talk about ISIS women being in the Khansar brigade, the police brigade, and that's it. So what is your take on foreign women in ISIL's military or intelligence apparatus? Thanks.
Thanks. I haven't seen this report, to be honest, or I don't remember seeing it. Like, I'm not sure, but I mean, ISIS women were especially, I mean, they are very active. They're really very active, and it's really weird. Like, I just learned today's ago interviewing one of my clients that you remember the famous video when a woman was brought, the woman was shooting across the trench,
yes. Yes.
So it's really weird. So I was interviewing a guy, he was part of Amnia, and a military emir of one of the biggest katibas. So he was like, oh yeah, by the way, this is like a totally fake video. He was there, he was like, they brought her, they gave her weapons, they took her away. And I'm like, but women were fighting. He was like, yeah, of course they were fighting. I was like, why then you did your fake video? So it's kind of really, but that's how I see right now the attitude about religion versus the reality, right? Like, they are really fighting, but then we do fake thing. Why? But they were fighting. They were all across the board. The medical staff was going female with them. They were really fighting. They were military units of women, which is the fun part here. Is this military units of Aisha and Seba? They actually didn't. So when the situation became really, really bad, And they kind of said, okay, guys, now you go. And they were like, oh, no, we are, by the way, housewives. And this unit did not quite participate, but then other women, they stood up and went. It was really weird. So it's really a lot of nuances there, really a lot. So I'm not sure. In terms of like working females working in intelligence, it's everywhere. So basically, I would say every female member I ever interacted with, and I interacted with hundreds of foreign, because I'm also involved in repatriation. I'm consulting government that are repatriating. I mean, they're everywhere there. And the biggest question is that they're everywhere now. I mean, now the ISIS is absolute female organization. All the money transfers, all the propaganda, it's all females right now. Like literally everything female. Because they understood that female are not being punished because there's a housewife. So they do everything that like their husband would get in trouble for 15 years, 15, 20. That's what female do. Because they're like, oh, but it's humanitarian. Like you raised $20,000 that you illegally moved to Syria to buy a girl out of the camp to send her to Afghanistan. Oh, but that's humanitarian. So they have a way out and they're using it, 100%. And we are, as a policy, we are nowhere being close to catching up, nowhere. Because we're still discussing that, ISIS foreign women are victims. While, there are many investigations going on about their involvement. And talking about transfers, it's a complicated issue. So first, I actually attended 4 days of this terrible, embarrassing French trials in Iraq, which were terrible and embarrassing when they moved French guys, 13, I think, French from Syria to be prosecuted in Baghdad with absolutely no evidences. And 2 of them have never been to Iraq before, not to say did any crimes there. One of them was not even French, it was like just like hilarious. And they didn't have a translator, which was, it was a joke. But and they all got death sentence. And so after that, I know that there was an agreement to bring many more foreign males into Iraq. But when the prime minister changed, he said no. He said, we're not going to be this like death ground for your guys, like deal with them. But I know that as far as I know, money were already transferred. So there was some kind of an underground scandal with that, among the elites of Iraq and foreign coalition or whatever. And I'm talking about foreigners. And then, some governments were like, okay, fine, we could not transfer to Iraq because they're going to get the sentences, would be a shit show, at home. So they agreed to move them to Erbil. And I know that you're a Russian Norwegian, or he's not Norwegian, or he has like permanent residence of Norway, was prosecuted in Erbil and got 7 years, ex-Nazi. I don't remember his name. But I know all his friends in Russia. And that's why I know this case, because I was working with your journalists on this issue. So he was transferred from Syria to Erbil, where he was sentenced for 7 years, which was very weird, first time, unprecedented issue. So first, he didn't get a death sentence or any ridiculous life sentence, and he got 7. And I know with him, there were several other weird people transferred. By weird, I mean, I know that there was a Japanese citizen transferred. He's the only Japanese citizen, he was the only Japanese citizen in custody of Syria. I know that he's also in Erbil. So some kind of really non-mainstream. So, like my hundreds and thousands of Russians are still sitting in Hasaka, right? But some very non-mainstream folks were moved to Erbil. But I didn't fall on that because, with this travel, I couldn't go there to interview them. And Erbil prison does not have a phone. Every other prison does.
Very interesting. I have 2 questions from the chat room that I could simply read. One is from Kirsten. a question from Germany, what would you recommend to European countries when it comes to trials and convictions? Should the times in the northern Syrian camps and prisons be counted, or what should be the penalty be? What should rehabilitation look like? Is de-radicalization possible?
Oh, good question. And Germany, I just had a issue with Germany about it. There is only one girl who managed to get out from Baghdad prison. She was till the end, she was in Mosul, till the very end. Then she was arrested. She was in a Baghdad prison for a year. And then she was magically released from Baghdad prison. Magically after 1 year, while all other women got life in prison. And now she's back home in Germany, and she's extremely vocal about being pro-ISIS. I found it strange at best. Like I interviewed her, and yeah, she told me a lot of nice things about how bad the coalition are and so on. I was like, that's weird. So I mean, I think that everyone should be repatriated because there is no place for them there. It's absolutely, and it's not secure, to put it nicely. And is the radicalization possible? Yes, but and we could see it, by the way. It's not a lot of people. We already have, for example, in Russia and Central Asia, a lot of people already got released from prison because they went to prison in 2014. So they're being released now. They didn't fall under terrorism law, they fall under mercenary law. So they got 6 years. And many of them are now integrated in society, no problems. Which the weird part is that males are doing better than females, which I found very interesting, but I could not explain. I mean, I don't even have a hypothesis about that. But males usually, I mean, they're just like, oh, well, ISIS didn't work, let's move on. But women are like worse in terms of the ones who they were just released. So I'm not sure, like, I think there's more studies should be done about it. And like, I could say what I see right now, but I didn't conduct any systematic study about it. But the question with women in Baghdad would be really weird. So apart from that strange magical case of a German Chechen, everyone else is there for life in prison. And last time I was helping one government talk to Iraq about their girl, and they said, we're not going to give them, nope, no money could help that case. And so it's not clear what's going to happen to those.
Thank you. I will read the other question from the chat. Can you say what you think at the risk of the camps being stormed by ISIS? I hear the security has deteriorated. And that's a question from Atle Mesoy.
Camps stormed by ISIS is not happening. Come on, it's a magical dreams of women there who still think that ISIS comes to liberate them. I mean, ISIS is absolutely weak. First of all, they're absolutely weak. Second of all, they don't care about foreigners. Right now, ISIS is very local. So, for example, in Iraq, it's all like, it's basically the leftovers of ISIS is a Sunni nationalist movement. No, I mean, storming camps, not possible. Like it's really not happening. But it doesn't mean it's safe. I mean, they've been smuggled every day out, and after they've been smuggled, their traces could disappear. They magically reemerge in Afghanistan. I don't know, like, it's not safe. This campus, you could get yourself out in $17,000, and it's being raised everywhere. Like this transfer in London, you could basically, you saw this newspaper article where basically you could give money in London, cash, to a guy to smuggle a woman. It's not like secret cryptocurrency or whatever. Cash in London, no problems. So it's that mainstream now. So I think we already lost, I mean, several thousand women from camps to nowhere. I mean, what are we waiting for? And we're discussing, should we repatriate it? I think at that point we need to be discussing how could we find those we already lost and track them back and repatriate them.
Okay, we still have a couple of minutes left. I have a question myself, if I may, while we wait for others. I was thinking about, you were talking about extrajudicial killing. I was wondering if there are also attempts at forming some networks to protect, these previous fighters from each other, and I'm thinking especially about protecting children from these attempts. Are they subjected also to these killings from below, if you want to call them that? And is there any way to protect them on the ground?
I don't know about killings of kids extrajudicially. I mean, I could be wrong. I couldn't say they don't exist. I don't know about them, because the cases I observed were right after the battle, like observed, like physically dead body, right? They were after the battle, so there were a lot of males, and I would say they are first hunting priority. So maybe now, I mean, I could not, I just don't know about that. I don't know about extrajudicial killings of kids. If there are any networks to protect ISIS families themselves, against those killings, yeah, I mean, that's why they don't want to return to Mosul. They're living in those camps outside of Mosul because they feel safer there. But males, males who know that they're absolutely dirty and they be arrested the second they appear in Mosul, they are all in insurgency. They're somewhere hiding in other places. Also, that's why a big problem here is that a lot of ISIS, for example, when Mosul was liberated, a lot of ISIS guys came from Fallujah to Mosul. Then they relocate so that their neighbors don't know who they are. So that's why, but it makes it worse. Like it makes it a colossal mess, basically.
I see. We have a last question from the chat. It's from Kirsten. Kirsten, I'm going to read it again. Do you have a prognosis to how things will go on with Idlib as an ecological niche for jihadists, including those who have fled ISIS from northern Syria and fled from camps?
Idlib is a magical place in itself. I think, as you know, it's weird. But the issue with Idlib, and I talk to people there constantly about it, is that they have the Idlib, meaning Hayat al-Sham, they have a colossal problem with ISIS people. And I could tell you about this Russian-speaking side of that, right? Like that's whom I'm involved very close with. And ISIS folks like killing their own people there, so they're super pissed. But they couldn't do anything, so they're kind of raising this question with Hayat al-Sham, but it's money. So they are profiting from those ISIS people sitting there. So they kind of tolerate it, but the situation is getting really, really like hot in terms of ISIS versus Hayat al-Sham guys in Idlib. So it could explode any minute. That's what I feel from foreign Russian speaking community, because it's all foreign fighters. That's why I'm looking that way, because they're sick and tired of those ISIS guys there.
Okay. Well, I guess there are no more questions, and I think we could wrap up, also considering that Vera, you have accepted to join us at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's been a lot for you. Thank you very much. And I'm sure this was very, very inspiring. And thank you for joining us, and we'll keep following your work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ciao, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.